I knew Anon before he had shoulders. That's the easiest way to explain it. Before the voice drop, before the tired eyes, before the office badge. Back then, he was just the boy next door. Scraped knees, untied shoes, bad handwriting. A permanent inability to stay out of trouble for longer than 15 minutes. And somehow, from the beginning, he was mine in the quietest way a person can be when they're a child and don't yet know what love is supposed to look like. Not mine like possession. Mine like familiarity. Mine like, I know how he laughs before he actually laughs. I know he always forgets his pencil case on Tuesdays. I know he acts brave when he's embarrassed. I know he hates being bad at things in public. I know he'll share his lunch if I forget mine, even when that leaves him half hungry by noon. He knew things about me, too. That I cried when adults raised their voices, even if they weren't angry at me. That I hated being called on without warning. That I got quiet when I was upset, not loud. That if I said, "I'm fine," too quickly, I usually wasn't. We were children, and children don't have language for things like emotional gravity. So we just called it friendship. We lived 3 houses apart, close enough that our mothers waved to each other over fences. Close enough that if my bike chain slipped, I ended up in his driveway. Close enough that most afternoons naturally turned into we. We did homework together, built terrible forts, shared snacks on concrete steps in the summer, raced our bikes too fast and lied about how fast when adults asked, made solemn plans with the full seriousness only children have. He was always a little chaotic, not destructive, just kinetic. If there was a puddle, he stepped in it. If there was a tree, he climbed it. If there was a bad idea with even a small possibility of fun, he looked at it like it had personally called his name. I was the opposite. I remembered sunscreen. I carried tissues. I knew where the extra bandages were in my mother's bathroom cabinet. I was the kind of child adults called sensible, which sounds like a compliment until you realize it usually means you make everyone's life easier. So naturally, I covered for him constantly. When he forgot assignments, I'd say, "He did do it, he just left it at home." When he got mud on his shirt 5 minutes before a family dinner, I'd stand in front of him while he tried to wash it in the sink. When he knocked over an entire tray of juice boxes at a school event, I helped him clean it up before the teachers could get there. He returned the favor in his own ways. If someone made fun of me, he got weirdly quiet and stood too close beside me until they lost interest. If I got nervous before a presentation, he'd whisper something ridiculous right before my name was called, just to make me laugh. If I fell, he was always the first one there. Not dramatic, just immediate, like helping me was a reflex. That was how we were. He was motion, I was caution. He forgot things, I remembered them. He made messes, I softened them. We fit before either of us knew that was a thing people could do. The first time I realized he mattered differently, we were 7, maybe 8, old enough to make promises, too young to know what they cost. There had been some stupid family gathering in somebody's backyard. Folding chairs, potato salad, adults talking in circles while children escaped in clusters. I hated those parties. Too many voices. Too many relatives asking the same questions in different tones. Too many moments where adults would say, "Go play," like play was a switch you could flip on command. So I hid, under one of the long folding tables in the yard, tablecloth hanging down low enough to turn it into a little cave. Anon found me, of course. He always did. He lifted the edge of the tablecloth, looked in, and said, "Oh, you're in your crypt." "It's not a crypt," I said. He crawled in anyway. That was another thing about him. He never stood outside my feelings and called them strange. He just climbed in and sat beside them. We stayed there for a while, knees bumping, listening to muffled grown-up laughter above us. Then he asked, "Why are you hiding?" "Too many people," I said. He nodded like that made perfect sense. Then he showed me the cookie he'd stolen from the dessert tray and broke it exactly in half. That was his diplomacy. We ate in silence for a bit. Then, with the full sincerity of a child saying something he believed completely for the exact 5 minutes required, he said, "If you don't find anyone when we grow up, I'll marry you." I turned to look at him. He was serious. Just a little dirty from outside. Cookie crumbs on his shirt. Hair doing whatever it wanted. Serious. I remember staring at him and asking, "Really?" He nodded at once. "Yeah. Promise." Then he held out his hand. I looked at it for 1 second before putting mine in it. "Promise," I said. We shook on it under the table, like two tiny idiots founding a nation. He smiled, satisfied. Then immediately got distracted because someone outside yelled something about sparklers. But I stayed still for another second after he left, staring at my hand. It was probably nothing. A child promise. A sweet one. A ridiculous one. But even then, some small part of me tucked it away carefully. As we got older, the shape of us didn't change all at once. It stretched. Elementary school became middle school. Middle school became uniforms that fit weird and voices that changed at different speeds and new kinds of embarrassment. He got taller before I did. I hated that. Not because height mattered, because suddenly he wasn't just the boy next door anymore. He was becoming. And I didn't know what to do with that. He still came by after school, still sat at our kitchen table, still borrowed pencils and returned them chewed, still called out to me from the sidewalk if he saw my bedroom light on. But there were moments now, tiny, dangerous moments. His hand brushing mine when he passed me something, the way he'd look at me after making me laugh just for 1 beat too long, the way my stomach would flip when I heard his bike skid to a stop outside. I didn't have words for any of that, so I stayed useful. That was always safer. I helped him study when he forgot half the material and pretended he didn't care. I fixed the formatting on his school projects because you're just better at this stuff. I reminded him of deadlines, covered for him when he was late, softened him in places the world might have punished. And he let me. Not because he was careless, because he trusted me. That trust was everything. It made the spark between us more dangerous, not less. Because friendship can survive a lot. It doesn't always survive wanting. And even then, even at 15, even at 16, some part of me already knew that if we crossed the line between us and it went wrong, I would lose more than a crush. I would lose home. So I said nothing. I think he said nothing for the same reason. We were close in that almost painful way people get when all the right feelings happen before either person is brave enough to speak. We joked too carefully, stood too close, sometimes went quiet for reasons neither of us named. Then one of us would always pull back. A joke, a shrug, a change of subject. Friendship first. Always. Because friendship was safer than risking ruin. Because I would rather have him almost than not at all. Because he mattered too much. There is a specific kind of sadness that only belongs to teenagers. It's not adult grief. Not yet. It's sharper, more dramatic, more private. It feels like standing on the edge of your own life and knowing something important is happening, while also being too young to know how to hold it. That was what the end of school felt like. Everyone else was talking about applications, cities, futures, freedom. I was thinking, this is the last summer before everything changes. Anand and I spent more time together that year, not less. Maybe because we both felt it. Maybe because neither of us wanted to say goodbye properly. So we practiced smaller versions of staying close instead. Long bike rides, late study sessions that somehow became conversations, walking home slowly, lingering. One night, we sat on the curb outside my house after dark, the street quiet around us. He was tossing pebbles badly at the drain and missing every time. I asked, "What if we end up in different places?" He shrugged, but not casually. "We'll still talk. What if we don't?" He looked at me then, straight on, no joke to hide behind. "We will." I wanted to ask more. Wanted to ask, will I still matter to you? Will you still remember? Did you mean the promise? Do you ever feel this too? Instead, I nodded and said, "Okay." He smiled at me in that steady, familiar way of his and bumped my shoulder with his. "Okay," he echoed. That should have been enough. Maybe it was, for that version of us. But I went to bed that night with my heart hurting in a way I knew had nothing to do with friendship anymore. And still, I kept quiet. Because the cruel thing about deep affection is that sometimes silence feels like the kindest choice, even when it is quietly breaking you. By the time we were 17, our friendship had become dangerous. Not broken, not dramatic, just too full. Too many things lived inside it. History, trust, habit, tenderness, and something else. Something neither of us touched directly, like there was an electric wire running through the middle of everything, and we had both silently agreed not to test whether it was live. It was. We both knew it. That was the problem. If only one of us had felt it, maybe it would have been easier. Sadder, but easier. Unrequited things at least have shape. You can grieve them, fold them up, tell yourself the story was only happening in one direction. But this did not feel one-sided. It felt paused, like standing on the edge of a sentence and never finishing it. There were little moments that made the silence unbearable. One afternoon after school, I was sitting on the floor of his room, helping him finish an essay he had postponed until the final hour, like his life depended on procrastination as a personal philosophy. He was at his desk, pretending to type while actually watching me with the guilty expression of someone who knew I was doing more work on his grade than he was. "You know," I said without looking up from the notebook in my lap, "if I fail because of your academic choices, I'm haunting you." He laughed. "That sounds serious." "It is." He rolled his chair back, came down to the floor beside me, and leaned over my shoulder to read what I'd written. Too close. That was the problem with him. He was always naturally, unthinkingly too close. His shoulder touched mine. His breath brushed my cheek. My whole body became way too aware of itself. "This is really good," he said softly. "It's your essay." "No," he said. "It's you saving my life again." I looked up at him then. Bad choice. He was closer than I thought. For one suspended second, neither of us moved. I don't know what my face looked like. I only know his changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Like he had felt the same shift I had. Like he was suddenly aware that there was almost no space between us and no good reason either of us had pulled away. He moved first. Too fast. Not rude, just abrupt. He stood up, rubbed the back of his neck, and said, "I should, finish this before your genius wears off." And just like that, the moment was gone. That happened a lot. The almost. The feeling that we had just stepped onto a bridge and then both panicked and ran back to our original side before either of us had to admit we'd wanted to cross. I hated how careful I became around him. Not cold careful. Fragile careful. The kind where every joke has two versions, the one you say and the one you don't because it gets too close to the truth. If someone asked whether we were dating, we both laughed too quickly. If we sat too close, one of us shifted. If there was a silence that felt too warm, too loaded, one of us broke it with something stupid. We were preserving something. That's what I told myself. Protecting it. Because friendship was real, solid, proven. Love, if that was what this was, felt riskier. What if we tried and failed? What if we crossed the line and then couldn't uncross it? What if one terrible breakup erased a decade of trust and bike rides and homework and summer evenings and all the tiny, ordinary moments that had built us into something so specific? I could survive not having him romantically. What I couldn't survive, or thought I couldn't, was losing access to him completely. So I made a private rule. Better the ache of restraint than the wreckage of losing him. I don't know if he made the same rule, but he behaved like someone who had. The strange thing was, we were still happiest in the simplest moments. Walking home, sharing food, sitting on his porch while the sky changed colors, arguing over music, helping each other with things neither of us really needed help with. One evening, my bike chain slipped off in the middle of the street, and before I could even kneel down to deal with it, Anand was already crouching beside the wheel. "I've got it," he said. "You always say that and then end up covered in grease." "Yeah, but heroically." I laughed and stood there holding the handlebars while he fixed it. When he looked up, there was a black streak across his cheek. I reached down without thinking and wiped it off with my thumb. We both froze. Not because the touch was scandalous, because it was gentle. Because neither of us pretended it wasn't. His eyes stayed on mine. My hand was still half raised between us. And there it was again, that unbearable, fragile feeling of standing at the edge of something enormous and saying nothing. He could have kissed me then. I know that now. Maybe I knew it then too. I think I wanted him to. Instead, after one long, impossible second, he smiled slightly and said, "You got it." My hand dropped. "Yeah," I said. And that was all. I rode home shaking anyway. Sometimes I think the most painful kind of love is the kind that remains almost possible for too long. If he had rejected me, I could have healed. If I had been sure he felt nothing, I could have redirected all of it into friendship and built a life around the absence. But uncertainty is greedy. It keeps taking. A look, a pause, a promise not repeated but never fully revoked. I remembered the under-the-table promise more often than I should have. It embarrassed me a little, how much it mattered. We had been children. He had offered it like a cookie or a marble or any other treasure children think they can hand over forever. But I still remembered the exact seriousness in his face, and some stupid part of me kept wondering whether he did too. One night, close to graduation, we were both sitting on the hood of his car in his driveway, not going anywhere, just watching the sky fade after a school event neither of us had wanted to attend. He looked over at me and said, "You're quiet." I'm thinking, that's always dangerous. I smiled faintly. Do you ever think about how weird it'll be if we don't know each other the same way in 5 years? He frowned. What do you mean? I don't know. I looked down at my hands. Just, people change. They move. They get busy. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You think I'm going to forget you? The question hit harder than I expected. No, I said too quickly. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? I could have told the truth right there. That I was afraid of more than distance. That I was afraid of timing. That I was afraid of our silence calcifying into adulthood until one day it was too late to break. Instead, I said, I just don't want things to get weird. He looked at me for a long second. Then he laughed softly, but there was something off in it. He said, we're already weird. That should have helped. Instead, it nearly broke me. Because he was right. We were weird. Too close for casual. Too restrained for honest. Too attached to admit it. Too scared to ruin what we already had. The line was right there. And both of us kept choosing not to step over it. Graduation approached like weather. I started hearing my own future in practical words. University, housing, classes, departure. And the closer it got, the more impossible he became. Not because he changed, because I noticed him more. The shape of his hands, the way he always rubbed the back of his neck when he was nervous, the stupid way his hair never did what he wanted. The softness in him people missed if they only saw the joking, easy version. He would make some throwaway comment and I'd think, how am I supposed to leave this? I don't know what he thought. I only know he started lingering too, calling later, walking slower, finding reasons to stop by. If one of us had just been braver, maybe the whole story would have bent there. Maybe. Or maybe we were exactly the age at which people know enough to feel everything and not enough to risk it. I'll never know. What I do know is this. We loved each other in a language too unfinished to save us. Not enough to keep us apart, too much to let us stay simple. And in the end, when the chance came to speak, we both did what frightened people always do. We protected the thing we had, even if protecting it meant losing the chance to become something more. Graduation should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt like a countdown I had failed to stop. Everyone around us was busy being 18 in loud, obvious ways. Photos, plans, panic disguised as excitement. People talking about freedom like it was something they could pack in a suitcase. I smiled in all the right places. I hugged people. I took pictures. I said things like, we'll all stay in touch, with the same doomed optimism everyone uses when they're too young to understand how distance really works. But underneath all of it, there was only one thought repeating in my chest. I am leaving him, without saying it. That was the unbearable part. Not just leaving unfinished. Anan and I had become so careful by then that even our silences had structure. We could sit side by side with a whole confession pressing at the back of our teeth and still somehow talk about weather, future classes, gas prices, anything except the thing that mattered. It was a kind of cowardice, a tender one, a mutual one. I hated it. I also understood it perfectly. Because if I said it, and he didn't say it back, I would lose the last uncomplicated version of us right before I moved away. And if he did say it back, then what? A doomed beginning? A long-distance heartbreak? A promise neither of us knew how to keep? So I said nothing. And because life enjoys cruelty in very small, polite forms, nothing was exactly what he gave me, too. The week before I left, he came by almost every day. Not always for long, not always with a reason, sometimes just to help carry boxes, sometimes to return things that could easily have waited until later. Sometimes, I think now, because he also felt time closing. My room became a landscape of departure. Half-full boxes, taped corners, stacks of books, the awkward sadness of deciding which parts of your old life can fit into a new one. Anand stood in the middle of it one afternoon, holding a lamp I had forgotten I owned. "This is ugly," he said. "It was a gift." "That doesn't make it less ugly." I laughed, despite myself. He looked at me then, and for a second it felt like before. Easy, warm, hours. Then the silence stretched. Then the awareness came back. Then the almost happened again. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, sealing a box of notebooks, when he crouched down to help. Our hands met over the tape dispenser. Nothing dramatic, just skin, warmth, pause. He looked up. I looked up. My chest hurt. He could have said it then. So could I. Instead, he smiled too softly and said, "You labeled this one important nonsense." I pulled my hand back. Accurate. And that was that. We kept choosing the doorway and never walking through it. My mother cried the morning I left. My father did not, but he stood by the trunk of the car for a long time, checking straps that did not need checking, which was his version of grief. Anand came over before sunrise. That part shocked me. He hated mornings. Always had. But there he was, hoodie on, hair still sleep-ruined, hands shoved into his pockets against the cold. He looked at the packed car, then at me, and something in his face made me think, for one wild second, now. He's going to say it now. Instead, he stepped closer and held out a paper bag. I frowned. "What's this?" He shrugged, suddenly awkward. "Road food." Inside were a sandwich, 2 juice boxes, the exact candy I used to buy at the corner store when we were 12, and a pack of gum. It was such a specifically him gift that I nearly cried on the spot. "You packed me a child's lunch," I said softly. He rubbed the back of his neck. "You forget to eat when you're stressed." That one line landed like a bruise, because it said, "I know you. I know you still. I will know you even after this." I looked at him and wondered how 2 people could be so close to honesty and still choose silence. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded once. Then, after a beat, "You'll text me when you get there?" "Yes." "Even if it's late?" "Yes." "And if the city turns out terrible?" "It won't." "You don't know that." I smiled then, because he sounded almost irritated with reality for daring to take me away from his radius. "I'll survive," I said. His expression changed. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for me. "I know," he said quietly. And there it was again. That same ache. That same unfinished shape between us. I wanted to tell him then. Everything. That I had loved him for years in the smallest, most careful ways. That I was afraid of losing him. That I was more afraid of losing him after trying. Instead, I did something even more pathetic. I said, "Don't forget me." He looked genuinely offended. "M." That was all. Just my name. But it carried enough feeling that I had to look away. Because if I didn't, I would ruin everything. He stepped forward and hugged me. Not the casual one-armed kind. A real hug. Tight enough that I could feel his heartbeat. Careful enough that it still felt like restraint. I closed my eyes and held on longer than I should have. If either of us had spoken into the space between our shoulders, I think the story would have changed. Neither of us did. When we pulled apart, he gave me that same small, serious look from under the table years ago. "Text me," he repeated. "I will." Then I got into the car. Then my father started the engine. Then the street, the houses, and the boy next door all moved behind me at once. I watched him in the side mirror until I couldn't anymore. The city was louder than I expected. Bigger, colder, less interested in me. University life started immediately and without mercy. Orientation, schedules, new faces, too many buildings that all looked temporary, even when they weren't. I did what I always do. I adapted. I made lists, found shortcuts, organized my notes, learned which cafeteria line moved fastest, figured out which professors cared and which only performed caring professionally. From the outside, I looked fine. I was fine, mostly, but homesickness is not always about place. Sometimes it's one-person shaped. Anand and I texted. Not constantly, not romantically, never dangerously, just enough to keep the thread alive. He'd send, "You survived the first week?" I'd answer, "Barely. This campus is designed by people who hate knees." I'd ask, "Did you ever turn in that form for your internship?" He'd say, "I did because your terrifying ghost voice told me to." Sometimes he sent photos of stupid things, a broken vending machine, a dog wearing a raincoat, a sunset over our old street when he was home late. Sometimes I sent back my tiny dorm room, campus in winter, the terrible coffee I kept drinking anyway. Nothing in those messages crossed the line. That was the tragedy. Even distance didn't make us brave. And slowly, quietly, I understood that leaving hadn't solved anything. It had only changed the shape of what hurt. University did something strange to me. Not all at once, quietly, like water changing stone. From the outside, I was still myself, the quiet girl, the good student, the one who knew deadlines before professors finished saying them, the one who apologized too much and carried tissues in every bag. But underneath that, something had started to harden. Or maybe not harden, steady. Because distance taught me something ugly. Being gentle does not protect you from pain. Being careful does not save you from regret. And loving someone silently for years does not make you noble. Sometimes it just makes you passive. I hated that realization. Not because it was wrong, because it was right. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to reinvent myself. That would have been dramatic, and I was never dramatic first. It started with a poster on campus for a self-defense course. I stood in front of it too long. A girl next to me said, "Thinking about it?" I should have laughed and kept walking. Instead, I said, "Maybe." She shrugged. "I heard it's good. Useful." Useful. That word got me. I was always useful, but usually in soft ways, organizing ways, quiet support ways. I suddenly wanted to know if I could be useful in a harder shape too. So I signed up. The first class was humiliating. Not because anyone was cruel, because I had no idea what to do with my own body when asked to take up space on purpose. The instructor kept saying things like, "Commit to the movement. If you hesitate, the other person feels it." Apparently, I apologized with my entire skeleton. Good to know. Still, I kept going. Every week, no matter how awkward I felt, no matter how much my arms ached after, no matter how ridiculous I looked trying to turn instinct into technique. I wanted something I couldn't quite name. Not toughness. Permission. Permission to not always be the one who freezes first. Permission to know I could act if I had to. Permission to stop feeling like the kind of person life simply happened to. The military prep course came later, which was even less like me. That was what everyone said, anyway. You? In tactical training? Are you serious? You're the least aggressive person I know. They all thought that was the point. It wasn't. I wasn't trying to become aggressive. I was trying to become certain. There's a difference. The course was brutal in the dull, repetitive way all useful training is. Early mornings, discipline, endurance, focus. Moving even when tired. Learning procedures until your body understood them before your mind caught up. I was not naturally good at any of it. I was too soft-spoken, too hesitant, too prone to overthinking. But I was stubborn in ways people rarely noticed because I didn't perform it loudly. So I stayed. I learned to keep breathing when pressure hit. Learned how to assess instead of panic. Learned that fear and action were not opposites. Learned that being gentle did not mean being helpless. That last one mattered most, because if I'm honest, part of me had always believed that the story of me was simple. I was the one who waited, the one who hoped, the one who helped, the one who watched life happen to louder people. I wanted to prove, even if only to myself, that this wasn't the whole truth. Maybe I wanted to prove it to him, too. Not directly. Not in some fantasy where I'd come back transformed and finally irresistible. Just that I had become someone who could choose, not just endure. Someone who could speak before it was too late. That part was almost funny in retrospect. Because even as I got stronger, even as I learned to plant my feet and commit to movement and push through discomfort, I still couldn't tell Anon I loved him. We kept texting. That was its own kind of ache. Not enough to build anything, too much to let go. He'd message at strange hours, "You alive?" And I'd answer, "Barely. Midterms are a hate crime." Sometimes I sent him photos of campus in the rain, old stone buildings looking dramatic for no reason. He'd reply with something stupid like, "Looks like the setting of a novel where everyone has tragic cheekbones." Sometimes he sent me pictures from home, his lunch, the view from a bus stop, a completely destroyed burger he claimed was still edible. Nothing intimate, nothing dangerous, and yet the thread between us never snapped. And all the while, I was becoming someone he wasn't there to see. I would finish a self-defense drill, chest heaving, palms stinging, and think, he would laugh if he saw this. Not cruelly, fondly, surprised, proud, maybe. Then I'd hate myself a little for still measuring growth in relation to a boy 3 cities away. Then I'd text him anyway. Once, during my second year, he called me instead of texting. That was rare enough that I almost dropped the phone. "Hey," I said too quickly. "Hey." His voice sounded tired, warm, familiar. Too familiar. We talked for nearly an hour about nothing extraordinary. Classes, commuting, his work, my coursework, whether adulthood was secretly just sustained confusion with paperwork. At one point, he laughed and said, "You still sound like you have your life more together than I do." I looked at the gloves on my desk, the course binder beside them, the half-finished paper open on my laptop, and thought, if only you knew. Instead, I said, "That's because I edit heavily." He laughed again. Then there was a pause. The kind we always had. The loaded kind. The kind that once might have turned into something if either of us had been braver. My heart kicked once, hard. Then he said quietly, "I miss talking to you like this." I closed my eyes. Me too. That was all. That was always all. Enough to keep hope alive. Not enough to let it grow, honestly. After the call ended, I sat there in the dark of my dorm room, with the phone still in my hand, and understood something clearly. Distance hadn't dimmed what I felt. It had only taught me how to survive it. By the time I finished university, I was stronger than I had been when I left. Not louder, not bolder in the obvious ways, just less fragile in my own eyes. I knew how to defend myself, how to keep moving when things hurt, how to choose action over panic at least some of the time. But none of that had solved the central problem. Anon still lived in me like an unfinished sentence, and I still had no idea whether life would ever give me another chance to finish it. Then one day, almost by accident, I found out where he worked. And for the first time in years, the future didn't just feel like something happening away from me. It felt close enough to reach for. I found out where Anon worked by accident. Or, at least, that's the lie I told myself. A mutual acquaintance mentioned the company name in passing. I went quiet for the rest of the conversation, and then spent that evening pretending I was not already searching job listings with my heart beating in my throat. It should have felt reckless. Instead, it felt inevitable. Not because I thought fate was waiting for me in a marketing department, because after years of distance, messages, unfinished pauses, and all the old ache stretched across time, I suddenly saw a door. A real one. And for once, I wanted to walk through it before fear found me first. So I applied. Then I interviewed. Then, somehow, impossibly, I got the job. The morning I walked into that office building for the first time, I was calm in every visible way and absolutely falling apart internally. New blazer, neat hair, resume smile. Heart doing things that would have concerned a doctor. And then I stepped into a conference room for onboarding, glanced across the table, and there he was. Older. Of course, older. That was the first thing that hit me. Not transformed into someone unrecognizable, just grown into himself. Broader shoulders, a little tired around the eyes, softer in the mouth somehow. More man than boy, but unmistakably the same person. He looked up, saw me, and for a second, we just stared at each other like the room had briefly disappeared. Then he blinked and said, "Emily?" The way he said my name nearly made me sit down on the floor. I smiled instead. "Hey, it's been a while." He laughed once, disbelieving and warm. "Yeah," he said. "A little." That was how I came back into his life. Not dramatically. Just one desk, one hallway, one conversation at a time. It was easy again, too quickly. That was the dangerous part. Not awkward, not stiff, not ruined by time. Easy. We slipped back into old rhythm with terrifying speed. Walking out after work together, sharing coffee, trading stupid comments in meetings, him stopping by my desk with questions he probably could have answered himself, me fixing his formulas and pretending I wasn't absurdly pleased every time he asked for help. It felt like some lost version of us had been waiting patiently under the surface all along. Older now, more restrained, more tired, but there. One evening, we left the office together, and he stretched like his spine had given up on the concept of support. "Long day?" I asked. He gave me a dry look. "Long life." I smiled. "That sounds healthy." "It gets worse," he said. "My commute's killing me." How bad? 2 hours if the trains behave, which they don't because apparently public infrastructure hates me personally. I frowned. That's awful. Yeah. He shoved his hands into his pockets. I'm thinking I need a new place. Somewhere cheaper, closer to work. Something in me sparked so fast it almost hurt. I kept my voice steady. Have you started looking? He shook his head. Not seriously. Every place is either too expensive, terrifying, or next to a nightclub with no curtains. I laughed. Then, before I could overthink it, I said, I can help. He looked at me, really looked, and smiled. That would actually be amazing. That one smile powered me for a week. We started looking together after that. Not constantly, just in little pockets. Lunch breaks, commute time, links sent at midnight with comments like, this one looks haunted but affordable. This one has decent light but the kitchen feels hostile. Why is every landlord allergic to lowering rent? It felt domestic in a way I tried very hard not to examine too closely. We were not playing house. We were just searching, just talking, just slipping, once again, into that old pattern where helping him made me feel useful and happy in equal measure. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't start imagining things. Small things first. Living nearby. Seeing him before work. Coffee in the same kitchen. Our old ease, but closer. Daily. Real. Then bigger things came, because hope is greedy when you let it breathe. What if this was the turn? What if all those years hadn't been too late, just delayed? What if we had been given one more chance, and neither of us missed it this time? I hated myself a little for hoping. I did it anyway. Then he found a place before I found the courage. He came into work looking tired, but weirdly relieved, dropped into the chair by my desk and said, I found an apartment. My heart kicked once. Oh? Yeah, cheap, close, kinda perfect, actually. I smiled too fast. That's great. He nodded. There is one weird detail. Something cold touched the back of my neck. What weird detail? He scratched his jaw. I'd be sharing with 2 women. I blinked. Oh. They're both lesbians, he added quickly. They're together. They don't care about me. I don't care about them. It just worked out. I kept smiling. I'm still proud of that smile, honestly. It was a masterpiece. Fragile, but structurally sound. That makes sense, I said. If it's a good place, it's a good place. Yeah, he said, relieved that I wasn't reacting strangely. Exactly. Exactly. He said a few more practical things after that, rent amount, distance from work, one of them being loud, the other seeming nice, the cat apparently judgmental. I heard maybe half of it, because somewhere inside me, something had cracked. Not shattered, that would have been easier. Just cracked enough to let in that old, awful realization. I was late again. Late to speak, late to choose. Late to become part of a life that kept moving just slightly ahead of my courage. Still, I held the smile, asked reasonable questions, acted like a good friend, because that was what I had always been best at. By the end of the conversation, he looked relaxed again, and I hated how much I loved being able to give him that. After he left, I went to the restroom, locked myself in a stall, and pressed both hands over my mouth until the feeling passed enough for me to return to work, looking human. For a little while after that, I quieted down. Not to punish him, never that. Just to survive the disappointment without letting it leak into places it didn't belong. He noticed, of course. He always noticed when my silence changed texture. One afternoon, he stopped by my desk and asked, "You okay?" "Of course," I said. That made him narrow his eyes immediately. I almost laughed. "I'm fine," I tried again, softer this time. He kept looking at me. Then he nodded slowly, like he knew I wasn't telling him everything, but didn't want to push. That made it worse. He was still kind, still careful, still him. How was I supposed to stop loving someone who behaved like that? So I recovered, or performed recovery well enough to pass. We went back to normal, or our version of normal. Coffee, work, shared jokes, late emails, him asking for my help, me giving it before he'd fully finished asking. At some point, while trying to force my heart back into a shape I could manage, I found another rental listing. A good one. Cheap enough, close enough, big enough for 2 people. I stared at it for a long time. Then I saved it. Not sent, just saved. Because this, I told myself, would be the moment. I would ask him to meet after work. I would show him the listing. I would say the truth cleanly, clearly, like the version of me that learned self-defense and military drills had actually grown brave where it mattered. I would say, "Live with me. Choose me. Let's stop pretending the line between us doesn't exist." I believed that for almost 3 whole days. Then he walked into work one morning with a face I had never seen before. Shocked, pale, soft in some impossible way. And he said, very quietly, "One of my roommates is pregnant." The world did not tilt. It should have. That would have at least matched how it felt. Instead, everything stayed horribly normal. The fluorescent lights hummed, someone laughed near the printer, a microwave beeped in the break room, and in the middle of all that ordinary life, my future simply disappeared. I remember staring at him. I remember him saying more, that it was unexpected, that he didn't know what happened next, that he was scared, that he wanted to do the right thing. I remember hearing my own voice say something kind, something decent, something a good person would say. "Congratulations," maybe, or "Are you okay?" or "That's a lot." I don't remember exactly. I only remember this. I did not tell him. Not then. Because good people do not throw their love like a grenade into someone else's crisis. Good people do not make a pregnancy announcement about themselves. Good people do not look at a frightened man trying to become responsible and say, "What about me?" So I said nothing. Again. And this time, the silence cost me everything. There was no dramatic collapse. That would have been easier. No dropped mug, no crying in the office, no shaking confession in a hallway, no storm outside that conveniently matched my emotional state. Just one sentence. One of my roommates is pregnant. And then the rest of my life dividing itself into a before and after, so cleanly it almost felt cruel. Before that sentence, there was still a version of the future I hadn't fully killed. A small one. A stubborn one. A foolish one. The version where I finally spoke. Where all the years between us turned out to be delay, not loss. Where his new apartment was not the end of possibility, just a detour before we found our way back. After that sentence, nothing. Not because he stopped caring about me, because he had crossed into real life in a way that did not leave room for fantasy. Pregnancy is not a crush. It's not timing. It's not unresolved tension or almost love. It is consequence, responsibility, a life beginning. And the moment he said it, I knew instantly, absolutely, that I was too late. He looked scared when he told me. That part mattered. He wasn't glowing, wasn't bragging, wasn't drunk on some reckless accident. He looked like someone standing on the edge of a cliff, trying very hard to become the kind of man who could build a bridge before anyone fell. And because I loved him, that made it impossible to be selfish. What are you going to do? He looked at me in a way that broke my heart all over again. Open, uncertain, trusting. I don't know yet, he admitted. But I'm not running. Of course he wasn't. That was the worst part. If he had been cruel or weak or careless, maybe I could have hated him a little. Maybe I could have turned my grief into anger and survived it faster. But he was exactly who I had always known him to be. Kind, responsible, terrified, but staying. So all I could do was sit there and love him for the thing that was quietly destroying me. That's good, I said softly. He exhaled like I'd given him something. Maybe I had. Maybe that was my tragedy. He looked down at his hands. I'm scared, he said. I wanted to say, I am too. I am scared I have lost you for good. I am scared I waited so long that life has now become irreversible. Instead, I said the thing a good friend says. You'll figure it out. He nodded once. Then he smiled at me. Small, tired, grateful. And that smile nearly finished me. I went home that night and sat on the floor of my apartment in the dark. Not because I was dramatic, because I genuinely could not think of what else to do with my body. There was a rental listing saved on my laptop, still open, still waiting, a small, hopeful rectangle of another life. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed it. Not deleted, just closed. That felt worse somehow, like shutting a door gently so no one would hear the sound it made. I did not cry right away. That would have been too clean. First came denial, a weird, numb denial that made everything around me look slightly fake. I went to work, answered emails, spoke in meetings, helped people, smiled when required. Some traitorous part of me kept thinking, maybe it's not what it sounds like. Maybe it'll be complicated in a way that changes things. Maybe this still isn't real. Then the days kept moving, and so did reality. A doctor's appointment here, a tired look on his face there, the way he started checking his phone more often, the way he talked about what comes next, like there was no question that he would be part of it. That killed denial eventually. Then came grief. Not dramatic grief, the private kind. The kind where you wash your hair and suddenly have to lean against the shower wall because your chest hurts. The kind where someone at work says, "You okay?" and you answer too quickly because if they ask a second time, you might fall apart in the break room. The kind where happiness becomes physically difficult to witness because it keeps arriving in someone else's arms. I hated myself a little for that. Not because I resented the baby, I didn't. I resented that I was good enough to love him properly and still not the one life had chosen for him. That's an ugly feeling, a real one, but ugly. So I kept it to myself. Months passed, then more. And because life was apparently not done humiliating me, one impossible thing became many. One baby became a family. One partner became two. One office announcement became another and another. Each time I congratulated him. Each time he smiled at me with that same tired, sincere gratitude. Each time I gave him the best version of my face and took the damage privately. It became a pattern. He would tell me some new, impossible thing. Lena's pregnancy, then Diana's, then George, then Miranda, then all the children that followed, like life itself had decided to run faster than my ability to process it. And I would say, "That's wonderful. I'm happy for you. You'll be a good father." None of those were lies. That was what made it so unbearable. Because I was happy for him. And I was hurting. And those two truths lived side by side in me so long, they started to feel like one disease. We still helped each other. That part never stopped, which was its own kind of cruelty. He would carry something heavy for me without making a performance of it. I would fix his spreadsheet before he had time to fully panic. He'd bring me coffee if I looked exhausted. I'd remind him about deadlines when his home life was swallowing his sleep whole. We slid so naturally into caring for each other that sometimes I thought, this is what ruins me. Not the distance, not even the family. This, the fact that even now, even after everything, we still fit in the old practical ways. Like school had never fully ended. Like we were still the same two children, covering for each other in quieter, more adult forms. One evening after work, he helped me with something I could have managed alone if I'd really had to. I texted him later. "Thanks for yesterday. You really saved me." Just that. A stupid, harmless message. But I stared at it for 5 full minutes before sending it, because every ordinary kindness between us still felt too close to a larger truth. He replied, "Anytime, Em. You know that." I did know that. That was the problem. I always knew he'd come if I needed him. I just also knew he wouldn't be mine when he got there. At some point, I stopped imagining a future where things turned. Not because I stopped loving him, because loving him started to feel less like hope and more like weather. Something constant, something shaping the day whether I wanted it to or not. I moved through seasons of it: denial, depression, acceptance, then some revised version of all three. I accepted that he wasn't mine. I did not accept that I could stop feeling it. That seemed to be the permanent compromise. So I made a life around the edge of his. Work, routine, politeness, occasional laughter. A growing family I watched from the side, like someone standing outside a warmly lit house in winter, able to see everything and touch none of it. And still, my heart never learned. It did not become sensible with time. It did not look at his happiness and finally understand how to quiet itself. It only learned endurance. That was my gift and my curse. I could endure almost anything. Until, eventually, I couldn't anymore. I stayed. That is the simplest way to describe those years. I stayed at the office. I stayed in his orbit. I stayed useful. I stayed kind. I stayed quiet long past the point where silence was noble. At first, I told myself it was temporary, just until the shock wore off, just until my feelings calmed down, just until his new life stopped feeling like a personal injury. Then 1 year became another, and I realized something humiliating. I had built an entire emotional survival system around being almost close to him. Not because I enjoyed pain, because some part of me still believed that losing him completely would hurt more. So I took the smaller wound every day instead. That was how I survived it. Badly, gracefully, repeatedly. From the outside, it probably looked fine. We were coworkers with history, friends who knew each other well. The kind of people who could communicate in half sentences and old references no one else fully understood. He'd stop by my desk and say, "Do you have 5 minutes?" And I always did. People joked, people stared, people whispered. I didn't. I just listened when he needed to talk. That was still my instinct, to make room, to study, to be useful in the shape most natural to me. He would stand beside my desk with coffee in one hand and sleep deprivation in his face and say things like, "I think George learned how to weaponize oatmeal," or, "I haven't slept in 3 days and one of the babies is judging me." And I would laugh, because he was funny even when he was unraveling. And because if I didn't laugh, I might say something far too honest, like, "I would have helped you with all of it. I would have loved that life too. I hate how naturally I can picture myself there." Instead, I said, "You need vitamins," or "You need a nap," or "You need to stop buying the cheap diapers." He always smiled like my practicality amused him. It did not occur to him, I think, how much tenderness I was burying under ordinary advice. Maybe that was my fault. Actually, it was definitely my fault. There were moments that nearly broke me. Not the obvious ones, strangely enough. Not the wedding announcement, not even the baby photos. Those hurt, yes, but they were public hurts, structured hurts, the kind you can brace for because you know exactly what role you're supposed to play. No, the worst moments were the small domestic ones that slipped into conversation by accident. Him saying, "Lena fell asleep on the couch with the baby on her chest," or "Diana made soup because everyone in the house is sick," or "We finally got all the kids down before 10. Those tiny details did more damage than any announcement, because they weren't spectacle. They were life. Morning light, mess, partnership, routine. The life I would never have with him, described casually between meetings while a printer jammed in the background. I'd smile and ask, "How are they doing?" and mean it. I always meant it. That was the cruelty. I wasn't faking goodness. I genuinely wanted his family to be well. I wanted him happy. I just also wanted, with a hunger that never learned manners, to be one of the reasons. Sometimes I hated myself for how little it took to keep me. A message, a thank you, a look held half a second too long. The old ease between us resurfacing for one bright, stupid minute. Once, after I stayed late helping him untangle a project disaster, he texted me after he got home. "Thanks for today. I really needed the backup." I stared at it so long, my phone dimmed. The office eventually stopped seeing me as just Emily from down the row. I became part of his mythology too, though no one said it directly. The quiet one who always understood him. The one who could calm him down in 5 sentences. The one who knew where the files were, what he'd forgotten, what he needed before he asked. People noticed. They did not always notice correctly, but they noticed enough. I overheard whispers sometimes. "Poor Emily. She's always there for him. You can tell she..." I never stayed to hear the rest. I didn't need to. The office saw more than I wanted and less than the truth. That was its own kind of humiliation. To be read, partially, and still remain invisible where it mattered. At some point, I began imagining leaving. Not dramatically, not as punishment, as self-preservation. A new city, a new office, a new apartment without the geography of his life stitched into every workday. No more seeing him come in, tired and warm, from a family I wasn't part of. No more hearing his children's names in break room conversation. The idea frightened me. it also felt like air. I started browsing job listings with the same numb determination I'd once used to look at apartments for him. Late at night, too many tabs open, resume updated, a future being quietly assembled out of escape routes. Even then, I hesitated, because leaving him willingly felt like amputating the last living part of a limb that had already gone numb. I didn't know who I was without this ache. I hated that. So I waited too long. Again. That, more than anything, was my flaw. Not loving too deeply, waiting too long to protect myself from it. The final years before I broke were not dramatic years. That's important. There was no affair, no late-night almost kiss, no betrayal. Nothing that actually crossed the line. That was precisely why it became unbearable. We remained good, decent, careful, and my heart kept starving politely. There is only so long a person can live on proximity. Only so long you can be important without being chosen before the shape of that importance starts to feel cruel. I did not resent his wives. That would have been easier. Diana was kind in all the ways people rarely are. Lena was fire, but honest fire. Together, they loved him well. I could see that. I could also see that I was slowly dying in the audience. So one evening, alone in my apartment, I packed one box. Not much, just enough to make the idea real. Then another. Then I sat on the floor between them and cried so hard I scared myself. Because after all those years, I finally understood. Staying near him was no longer kindness. It was self-erasure. And if I didn't leave soon, I was going to spend the rest of my life being the quiet woman in the corner who loved him beautifully and never once belonged to him. I couldn't survive that. Not forever. So I made a decision. I would go. But before I went, I would tell him. Everything. Even if it broke me. Especially if it broke me. Because I had already given too many years to silence. And I could not bear the thought of becoming old with one sentence still lodged in my throat. I chose a gray stairwell for the confession because it felt appropriately unromantic. That sounds bitter. It wasn't. Or not only that. I think some part of me knew that if I tried to make it beautiful, I would lose my nerve. If I picked a sunset or a quiet cafe or any place that invited hope, I might start pretending this was still a love story with options. It wasn't. It was an ending. Or I thought it was. So I asked him if he had a minute, led him to the stairwell near the back hall where no one ever went unless they were smoking secretly or having a panic attack privately, and stood there with my hands shaking so hard I had to grip the railing to stop them. He looked at me and asked, "Emily, are you okay?" No. I almost laughed at the question. No, I was not okay. I had not been okay for years in precisely the shape his kindness had made impossible to diagnose. But instead I said, "I need to tell you something before I leave." That got his attention. "Leave?" I nodded. "I'm moving." His face changed immediately. Not enough to save me, enough to hurt. Why? Because I love you. Because I have loved you since childhood. Because watching you go home to everyone but me is slowly killing something in me I no longer know how to regrow. I swallowed. Then, because there was no point protecting him from the truth anymore, I told him. All of it. That I had loved him since we were children. That the bike chain and the lunches and the promise under the table had never really left me. That I had waited too long, stayed too quiet, mistaken silence for virtue. That seeing him become husband and father and center of a life that did not include me had hurt in ways I no longer knew how to carry gracefully. He went very still. I kept going because I had to. Because if I stopped halfway, I would die of it later. "I'm not telling you this to make you choose," I said. "I'm not asking you to break anything. I know your life is real. I know your family is real." My throat tightened. "But I needed you to know that when you promised you'd marry me one day, I believed you a little longer than I should have." His eyes widened then, the memory landing. Too late, too clearly. I smiled, though it hurt. "You probably forgot," I said softly. He shook his head once, but not convincingly enough. "That's okay," I whispered. "That's part of why I have to go." He said my name, just my name, but this time it sounded like regret. So I stepped back before I lost the little dignity I had left and said the cruelest true thing. "All those words you gave me when we were small?" I looked at him. "They don't mean anything now." That wasn't fully fair. I knew it even as I said it. He had been a child. We both had. But pain does not always care about fairness when it finally speaks. He looked devastated, in that quiet, stunned way kind people do when they realize too late that they have broken something simply by living honestly. I almost apologized. Instead, I said, "Goodbye, Anon." Then I left before he could answer in a way that would make me stay. I quit 2 days later, professionally, politely, with paperwork and brief explanations, and no mention of the fact that if I stayed another month, I might dissolve in the copy room. Then I sat in my apartment for 3 days and reconsidered everything. That was the humiliating part no one writes songs about. Not the confession, not the leaving. The wobble after. I packed, unpacked, looked at job listings in other cities, closed them, opened them again. I cried in the shower like a cliche, ate crackers for dinner, stared at the ceiling, told myself I had done the brave thing, told myself bravery should feel better than this. It didn't. It just felt final. On the 4th evening, the sky turned black with rain, and I decided I couldn't sit inside one more hour with my own thoughts circling like trapped birds. So I took my keys and said out loud to no one, "At least the rain will hide the tears." Very dramatic, I know. But the thing about heartbreak is that it makes even sensible women narrate themselves like novels. I drove with no destination, just roads, wipers, the city turning soft and unreal under the storm. I wasn't thinking clearly, not in any useful way, just feeling. And somewhere in the middle of all that rain, as I came up onto the bridge, I saw a car ahead of me swerve. At first it meant nothing, then everything. The shape, the color, the way it clipped the railing. I knew his car before my mind said his name. No, that was my first thought. Not, "Oh God," not "call someone," not even, "Is that him?" Just, no. The car hit the barrier. Metal screamed. The world tilted. And then, impossibly slowly, horribly slowly, the whole vehicle broke through and dropped. I stopped breathing. The car vanished over the edge. For half a second, I sat frozen behind my own steering wheel, rain slamming against the windshield so hard it sounded like static. Then my body moved without consulting me. Door open, seatbelt off, feet on wet concrete, the river below black and violent and impossible. I don't remember deciding to jump. I remember only this. If he was in that water, then I was going too. So I ran and jumped. The cold hit like punishment. Every training course I'd ever taken returned at once in fragments. Kick, orient, find the vehicle, don't panic, move. His car was sinking nose first, dark under the water, one window shattered. I saw him inside. Still. For one awful second, my whole body stopped with terror. Then I forced it to move. I reached the car, pulled, fought the angle, the water, the stupid trapped shape of metal. He wasn't conscious. His seatbelt was jammed. I don't know how long it took. It could have been 10 seconds. It felt like an entire life. At some point, I got him free. At some point, his weight became real in my arms. At some point, the river stopped being a place and turned into one command only. Get him up. I got him to the bank somehow. On instinct, on training, on terror, on love. He wasn't breathing when I dragged him onto the wet concrete. That is the memory that still wakes me. Not the fall, not the water. His face. Too still, too pale, too close to gone. I dropped to my knees beside him and put my hands where they needed to go before my mind could collapse. "Don't you dare die," I heard myself say. Then louder. "Don't you dare die on me." I pushed, counted, breathed for him, pushed again. Rain in my eyes, river water everywhere. My hair stuck to my face, my whole body shaking so hard I could barely feel my own hands. "Please," I whispered between compressions. "Please. Please breathe. Please." "You idiot. Not like this. Not after all this. Not after I finally told you." I don't even know what else I said. I said everything. I said nonsense. I said prayer without believing in prayer. And then he coughed. Water came out of him, and I started crying so hard I could barely keep doing what needed to be done next. But he coughed. He was alive. Sirens came after that. Voices, light, hands taking over. Someone asked who I was. I said, "Friend." Then almost laughed, because language had become completely useless. In the ambulance, they said he'd lost blood and asked if I knew his type. I did. Of course I did. So I gave blood while still soaked through, sitting there with a blanket around my shoulders and river water drying on my skin, and the taste of his almost death still in my mouth. That is not a romantic image. It should be. It isn't. It was ugly, and real, and holy in the worst possible way. Love stripped down often is. At the hospital, they took him from me. That was right. Necessary. Cruel. I waited long enough to hear that he was alive and likely to stay that way. Then I stood outside his room and looked through the small glass window in the door. Machines, blankets. His face, too still for my taste, but no longer gone. I put my hand over my mouth. For one weak, shameful second, I wanted to walk in and stay. I wanted to be there when he woke. I wanted to hear his first confused word and answer it. I wanted, for the briefest flash of selfishness, to be the one beside the bed when his life resumed. But he had wives, children, a real home, a real world. I was not going to take that first moment from them. Not even now. So I slipped into the room while he was still unconscious, touched his hand once, bent down, and kissed him very lightly on the mouth. Not to start something, not to claim anything. Just because, after all these years, and all that water and all that fear, I needed one true thing that belonged only to me. Then I whispered, "Goodbye," and left. The next afternoon, I met up with Lila, my oldest friend besides him. Now a cop, still impossible. The kind of woman who could make compassion sound like an arrest warning. She listened to the whole story in complete silence, leaning against her car with a coffee and the expression of someone watching a train derail very elegantly. When I finished, she whistled once. "Wow," she said. "They could make a movie out of you." She paused. Just without the romantic happy ending. I let out a shaky laugh. "That sounds right." She eyed me. "So what now?" I looked down at my hands. "The worst part," I admitted, "is I forgot to say one more thing." Lila stared at me, a full, flat, "Are you serious?" stare. Then she groaned and dragged a hand down her face. "You are unbelievable." "I know." "No, Emily, listen to me carefully." She pointed her coffee at me like a weapon. "You jumped off a bridge. You drowned emotionally and almost literally. You gave him blood. You kissed him goodbye like a tragic Victorian widow. And now you want a sequel?" I looked away. "Maybe." Lila made a noise usually reserved for crimes against nature. "You are hopeless." That feels a little harsh. It is the correct amount of harsh. I smiled faintly despite myself. Then I said, quieter, "I just want to know if he's okay." That softened her a little. Not much, but enough. She sighed. "I'm already heading to that hospital this week," she said. "My idiot boyfriend wanted to come patrol with me like he's in an action movie. Civilian, 0 training. Broke his hand tripping over a curb." That got an actual laugh out of me. "I'm sorry." "You should be. I had to fill out paperwork." She squinted at me, then relented. "I can find out when your disaster man has his follow-up appointment." My face warmed immediately. "Lila." "What?" "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," she muttered. "This is not support. This is crowd control." I smiled anyway. "And tell your boyfriend I said I hope he heals fast." Lila snorted. "I'll tell him. And your little bridge prince, too." Then she added, with mock reluctance, "Though not from the heart." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about river water, hospital lights, promises under tables, and all the ways goodbye had already failed. Because the truth was this: I had left beautifully, and I was still going back. The next day, we talked by the tree. He said words I never could have expected. They were so absurd that any normal person would have thought he was crazy. But I wanted to hold on to that hope, with all my heart and with everything I had. That should have embarrassed me. Instead, it felt like fate clearing its throat and refusing to let the story end where I'd put the period. So I waited for the next moment, for whatever came after. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the grief and fear and exhaustion, one impossible thing began to stir again: hope.
I knew you before the shoulders came, before your voice got low, before life had weight. 3 houses down, scraped knee, summer air. You broke your cookies in half, I learned you'd always care. We called it friendship 'cause we were too young to know. But under that folding table, you promised you'd never let me go. I knew you before the world got loud, before silence learned to live, and everything we never said stay still, too close to light, too scared to make it real. I found you again, older under office lights. Still the same heart, just hidden better inside. Then life chose faster than I did. You built a world I couldn't fit in, and I loved you quietly till quiet almost did me in. Then the rain came down and I watched your car go under. I jumped because loving you had already made me reckless. Long before the water I pulled you back, begged your lungs to fight. And in that hospital room I kissed you once, like hope still had a right. Before fate got cruel, before all the ways life tried to make me live without you. I knew you before, and maybe that still matters now. Maybe love unfinished is just love waiting to be spoken out loud. I knew you before, I know you still, and somewhere under all this time I always will.